In this video, we're going to talk about two very important concepts. That is GDP, or Gross Domestic Product, and national income. Both of these are extensions of the circular flow model. Let's dive on into GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. What is GDP, or Gross Domestic Product? It is the total expenditures on final goods and services. Now there's a key point right there. We say the word final goods and services. All of those intermediate goods that go back into production, those are not considered part of the GDP. They are not considered or calculated when we're calculating this gross domestic product. Why? Because it goes right back into production. You're buying and selling things over and over and over again, and if we included those in GDP, it would make our GDP look astronomically larger, because a lot of the goods are intermediate goods being bought and sold continuously as they get transformed into new and better products. So as a result, GDP only accounts for final goods and services. So what is this really a measure of? Well, it's a measure of the rate of flow of economic activity. So just like we have your water meter. Remember, you turn on your water and your water meter starts pumping. It starts creating a measurement of actually how much water you're using. Well, if you think about it that way, we could think of GDP as a water meter, and it's calculating the dollar value of all of the final goods and services being bought. So whenever we're looking at this, we're thinking of what is the amount, what is the dollar value of all of the stuff that we have bought in the United States? What is all the total value of all the stuff that consumers have paid to producers for their goods and services, for their final goods and services? What is that rate? Well, that's that economic activity of the United States. That is the rate at which people are buying stuff. So whenever we talk about GDP, what we're doing is we're placing a dollar figure on all of the stuff that we are going to buy within a given year, within a given calendar year, or something to that effect, or fiscal year. We are figuring out what is the total dollar value that we spent on stuff. So, we have this rate of flow of money that we're spending on stuff. And it's all being calculated by the U.S. Department of Commerce. They're the ones who sit down and they're calculating GDP usually on a quarterly basis. If GDP is positive, if this rate of economic activity is positive, that means that GDP is going up, and that means that we can now buy more stuff. We have more money, or more money is being spent on more stuff, or more stuff is being bought. Basically, that's what it means, is that positive GDP means that we're buying more stuff. Either that or we're just spending more on that stuff. Whereas a negative GDP means we're going into a recession, which means that this little meter right here is going backwards. It means we have less money to buy stuff with. Or if it doesn't mean that we have less money, it means we're spending less money on stuff. Whenever you're spending less money on stuff, that typically means that you are in a recession. So if GDP is positive, that's good, typically. If GDP is negative, that means that we're sitting in a recession. Next, we're going to discuss national income. So, we've already said that gross domestic product is the rate of flow of economic activity. We can measure it just like we can a water meter and see what is the rate of stuff that we're buying. What is the value of that stuff that we're buying? What about national income? National income is the total value of all factor payments. So remember those factor services, or those factors of productions? Those were land, labor, and capital, and management. And we said that we had factor earnings that were used to pay for these factor services, or these factors of production. Well, these are also what you consider factor payments. So what this is, national income, is how much are we paying out for these factor services, for these factors of production. So we have it down here. Remember, producers pay these factor earnings, and it goes to consumers. Well, what national income is we're measuring that rate, measuring how much are we paying for these factors of production? Now remember, this is a circular flow, and it's a closed circular flow. And what that means is, theoretically, the amount that we are paying in factor services had better equal the amount that people are turning around and paying for their products. Because it wouldn't make much sense otherwise. If we were spending more than what we're earning, because this national income is showing what we're earning, where GDP is showing what we're paying, if we're spending more than we're earning, that doesn't really add up. Or if we're earning more than we're spending, it doesn't really add up there either. And yeah, you say, well, you can save or you can borrow. But we'll show later on in the last video that the amount that's being saved is being redistributed to the amount that's being borrowed. So, theoretically, national income needs to equal gross domestic product. That the amount that people are earning in these factor earnings, this dollar value of factor earnings, needs to equal this dollar value amount of products being bought. And that's the way it should work in theory. But in reality, we have some measurement adjustments. These measurement adjustments cause the national income and GDP to be slightly different. We just got done talking about how GDP, in theory, should equal national income, but in reality, it doesn't. Well, this is due to some of the empirical and conceptual difficulties with measuring GDP and national income. Well, now we're going to talk about two of those measurement difficulties. The first one is that many prices established for goods within the United States are developed based off of market prices. And that's the prices that we use in GDP. The market prices show that the economic value equals the physical value of that particular good. Well, what happens whenever a good is not traded in a market? So let's say, for example, that we talk about social goods. Goods like national defense, or cancer research, or police departments, or fire departments. Well, those are providing a final good or service. But how do you calculate that? There is no market for cancer research. So what is the true value of cancer research? Well, if there's not really a market there, it's very hard to figure that out. What is the true value of, say, national defense? Well, it's pretty hard to figure out because there is no actual market for it. So because of certain aspects such as social goods, we have to figure out that there's not a fair estimate of social value for these goods. So as a result, we include them at cost. So whenever we include, say, cancer research into the GDP, we include it at its cost of producing it. We're not doing the value, we're not showing the value, we're showing the cost. And that is different from many goods that are in markets, because the market price is often different from the cost of production. So that's one of the main difficulties that cause GDP to be different from national income. And also, since we use market prices, it's not really a good measure of well-being for a particular country. So we often try to measure GDP from one country to the next to show, well, how well off are the citizens. And it's not really a good measure of that whenever you start creating products such as maybe a drinking straw that turns dirty water into fresh, clean water. And you give that to, say, a third world country whose GDP is very low, and now they're producing that and they're selling it, but they're not really obtaining a high price for it, and the value is not really where it should be. Well, the GDP only rises slightly, but the well-being of the country rises drastically. So we find that there's an issue sometimes between the value and the cost of producing that product. We have a divergence between the value and the cost of producing. And whenever this occurs, we start finding out that GDP is going to be fairly difficult to measure. Another major aspect of another major measurement difficulty is some goods are not traded on the cash market. The perfect example that your book uses is a stay-at-home mom. A stay-at-home mom is providing an economic service to the country by staying at home and taking care of their kid. They are providing an economic service and working very hard at it, but it's not measured in GDP. As far as GDP is concerned, a stay-at-home mom really doesn't count. Why? Because it's not being traded on a cash market. But here's the deal. If you would hire out a nanny and a maid to take care of all of the goods that you are taking care of as a stay-at-home mom, those are included in the GDP. So empirically, we now have a difficulty right there. Because if you're a stay-at-home mom and you do it yourself, you take care of it yourself, you're not included in the GDP. But if you hire it out to be done, then it is included. So because of some goods are not traded on a market, it often causes GDP to be slightly skewed one way or the other, causing GDP and national income not to equal each other.